Don't drink that, sir. Please, you have to stop before you go in there. Reed Carmichael turned from the boardroom door and looked down the corridor of the Rideau Club's second floor. He had been on his way to the private meeting room at the end of the hall, a room he had booked 6 weeks ago at the insistence of his lawyer to finalize the transfer of majority interest in Carmichael Properties before the end of the quarter. His right hand was still on the door handle. His mind had been somewhere else entirely. The boy standing at the far end of the hallway was perhaps 11 years old. He wore a gray work vest 2 sizes too large and held a yellow flashlight loosely at his side. He was looking at Reed with eyes that did not waver, calm and serious in a way that seemed at odds with the size of him. Reed let go of the door handle. "I'm sorry?" "The water pitcher," the boy said. "The one they just took into your room. I watched a man open it in the service corridor. He added something from a small flask he had in his jacket. Then he closed the lid and wiped it with a cloth and gave it to the server to carry in." Reed stood very still. Around him, the club was quiet in the way that old buildings in Ottawa go quiet at 2:30 on a Tuesday. The lunch crowd gone, the afternoon crowd not yet arrived, the staff moving between rooms with the efficient, nearly silent rhythm of people who had worked in the same place for many years. A woman in a white button-down was refilling a sideboard at the far end of the hall. A man in a dark blazer was polishing brass near the staircase. Nobody was paying attention to the boy. Nobody was paying attention to Reed. "What's your name?" Reed said. "Finn," the boy said. "My dad is the electrician here. He's downstairs fixing a panel. He brought me today because my school has a professional development day. He said I could sit in the reading room, but I was walking around and I saw it happen. And I didn't know what to do, and I didn't know whose room it was. And then I asked Jerry at the front desk, and he said it was yours, so I came to find you because I didn't know what else to do." He said all of it in one breath, like something he had been rehearsing on the way up the stairs. Reed looked at the door of the private meeting room. Through the small glass panel, he could see the table, the chairs, the credenza along the far wall. He could see the corner of a water pitcher on the table and the empty glass set beside it. The man, Reed said. What did he look like? He was wearing a white server uniform, but he didn't have a staff badge. "I know what the badges look like because I've been sitting in the reading room for 2 hours and I've been watching the staff. They all have a badge, on a lanyard, red and white. He didn't have one. And he came in through the service corridor, not the kitchen side, the other side, the one by the loading dock. The kitchen staff used the kitchen side. I know because my dad took me through the building when we first got here." Reed felt something shift in his chest, not alarm yet, but the precursor to it, the quiet moment before a storm front when the air changes temperature and the birds go still. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He dialed his lawyer's number. Ingrid Kowalski picked up on the second ring. "I need you to delay the signing," Reed said. "Tell the others there's a scheduling issue. Tell them anything you want. Just don't let anyone touch the water that was just set in that room. I'll explain in a few minutes." There was a short pause. "Reed, everyone is already here. Your brother is already seated. The notary drove from Kingston." "Ingrid, please." Another pause. Then all right, 5 minutes. Reed ended the call and looked at Finn. "You said the man left through the loading dock side?" "Yes, I watched him go. He was fast. He had the flask back in his jacket before the server even reached the elevator." "How long ago?" "About 8 minutes." Reed pressed his palm flat against the boardroom door without opening it. He thought about what it would look like to walk back into that room and tell everyone to stop, to call his half-brother a liar in front of a notary and a family lawyer, on the strength of what an 11-year-old boy had told him in a corridor. He thought about what it would look like if the water turned out to be perfectly fine and the man without a badge had simply been a new employee whose lanyard broke that morning. Then he thought about the fact that Donovan had called him twice last week, asking him to delay the signing. Both times, Reed had said no. He turned to Finn. "Come with me. Don't say anything to anyone yet." He walked to the house phone mounted near the staircase landing and asked for the general manager. When Gordon McAllister, a careful man who had run the Rideau Club for 14 years, arrived 60 seconds later, Reed spoke to him quietly and precisely. He did not use the word poison. He did not use the word attempt. He used words like contamination concern and unidentified individual in service areas and need the contents tested before anyone touches it. McAllister's expression changed once, briefly, and then became very controlled. "I'll pull the security footage and call our food safety contact immediately," he said. "We'll have the pitcher removed and sealed for testing. It will look like a routine quality check." "Good," Reed said. "Nobody goes in or out of that room." Understood. McAllister glanced at Finn, then at Reed. Is there somewhere the boy can wait? I'd like his father here first, Reed said. Is there a way to reach the electrician working on panel 7B in the basement? Patrick Okoro arrived 4 minutes later, still holding his voltage tester, his work belt hanging from one hip. He was a broad-shouldered man in his mid-40s, with careful eyes and dried grease on the backs of his hands. When he saw Finn standing beside Reed Carmichael on the second floor, his face moved through 3 expressions in rapid succession: confusion, relief, and a sharp alertness that told Reed this was a man who understood something had happened even before he was told what. What did he do? Patrick asked, looking immediately at his son. He didn't do anything wrong, Reed said. Mr. Okoro, your son may have just done something very important. I need a few minutes to explain. Patrick listened the way some people listen, not waiting for a gap so he could speak, not assembling his response while the other person was still talking. Just present. When Reed finished, Patrick looked at Finn for a long moment. Finn looked back at his father without flinching. I told him right away, Dad, Finn said. I didn't wait. I know, Patrick said. You did the right thing. The water was tested by a public health contractor, McAllister, kept on retainer for situations of this kind. Rare in a place like the Rideau Club, but not impossible, because a private members club where significant business and political decisions were routinely finalized was also a place where significant grudges sometimes arrived wearing catering uniforms. The testing took 41 minutes. Reed spent those 41 minutes in a small office down the hall from the boardroom, accompanied by Patrick and Finn, saying very little. He declined 3 calls from his half-brother's cell phone. On the 4th, he answered. Reed, what is going on? Donovan's voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it, a tightness that had not been there in previous weeks. Ingrid won't tell us anything. We've been sitting here for nearly an hour. There's been a situation with the catering, Reed said. Building management is addressing it. Hang tight. A pause. These things happen. We can reschedule. In fact, look, I've been thinking. Maybe we shouldn't rush this anyway. Maybe we should let the lawyers take another look at the transfer structure before we finalize anything. Reed said nothing. He let the silence sit on the line between them. Reed. I hear you, Reed said. I'll call you soon. He ended the call and set the phone face down on the desk. Patrick Okoro was watching him from the chair, across the room. Finn was sitting beside his father with his yellow flashlight, still in his hand, legs not quite reaching the floor, looking at nothing in particular, with the patient quality of a child who had been raised to wait without demanding that the waiting end. Mr. Carmichael, Patrick said carefully, is there something specific you're worried about in terms of who might be behind this? Reed considered the question. He had spent 47 years in business. He had learned over those years that the question of who was almost always simpler than the question of why. My half-brother, he said, Donovan. He stands to lose a significant amount of influence if the documents in that room are signed today. Patrick was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Is that a surprise to you? Reed didn't answer right away. It was the most honest question anyone had asked him in a very long time. The test results came back at 4:05. McAllister brought them personally, along with a public health officer named Dr. Sheila Tran, who had driven over from the Carling Avenue office, and who spoke in the careful, specific language of someone who had testified in court enough times to understand that every word she said might matter later. She placed a single printed page in front of Reed and explained, without drama, what it said. The pitcher had contained ethylene glycol, concentrated, consistent with industrial antifreeze compound. At this concentration, Dr. Tran said, ingested in the quantity a person would typically consume during a business meeting, 2 glasses, perhaps 3, over the course of 90 minutes, it would produce symptoms consistent with acute kidney distress within 4 to 6 hours. In a person with pre-existing cardiovascular or renal concerns, the timeline could be significantly shorter. Reed had had a minor stroke 11 months ago. His cardiologist had told him his kidneys were functioning at the lower edge of the normal range. His medical file with his insurance provider was not a secret. It was, in fact, a matter of considerable documented record. Would it have looked like a natural event? He asked. Dr. Tran chose her words precisely. In a man of your age and medical profile, presenting symptoms would be consistent with a cardiac or renal emergency. Depending on the speed of treatment, the underlying cause might not have been identified in time to be relevant. She did not elaborate on what in time to be relevant meant. She did not need to. The Ottawa Police Service's Major Crimes Unit sent 2 detectives before 6. The lead was Sergeant Lena Marchetti, compact, unhurried, with a notebook she barely seemed to use. She asked Reed questions the way investigators ask questions when they already know the general shape of what happened and are simply building the path toward proving it. She asked about Donovan. She asked about the timing of the document's signing. She asked about Reed's medical history without making it feel clinical. And then she asked to speak with Finn. Patrick stayed in the room. Finn sat very straight in his chair and described the man in the white uniform with the precision of someone who had been paying close attention and knew the difference between what he had seen and what he was guessing. The flask was small, clear, with a dark cap. The man had moved quickly but not nervously, like someone carrying out a routine task. He had wiped the pitcher lid with a cloth he tucked back into his jacket pocket. He had nodded once at the server, who came to collect the pitcher. The brief nod of two people who had arranged something in advance. And then he had left through the loading dock corridor without looking back. Sergeant Marchetti wrote one thing in her notebook during the whole of Finn's account. When Finn finished, she looked at him for a moment. "You're a careful observer," she said. Finn considered this. "My dad says you should always look at what people actually do, not just what they say. He says most of the time what they do tells you everything." Patrick looked at the floor when his son said that. His jaw was tight. His eyes were not. The man Finn had described, a former contract catering worker named Bryce Adler, who had been let go from a Byward Market restaurant 2 years prior, was identified through the club's exterior camera footage before 7 that evening. He was arrested at a motel in Canada at 9:15. He had $4,800 in cash in a white envelope in the inside pocket of his jacket. He provided a full account within 2 hours of his arrest. The chain was short. It led from Bryce Adler to a numbered account registered in Donovan Carmichael's wife's name to 3 phone conversations documented with uncomfortable clarity across Donovan's own cell records. Donovan was charged the following morning. His lawyer issued a 2-sentence statement saying his client maintained his innocence and looked forward to presenting his defense at the appropriate time. The statement sounded precisely like what it was. The document signing took place 11 days later in Ingrid Kowalski's office on Metcalf Street. No catering, no water pitchers. Just Reed, Ingrid, and a notary who asked the correct questions and stamped the correct pages. Reed's daughter Sophie attended by video from Vancouver, where she had been running the Western Division for the past 3 years. When the notary confirmed the transfer was complete, she pressed her hand flat against the camera on her laptop. Reed pressed 2 fingers against his own screen. They held that way for a moment, not dramatic, just real. "Dad," she said. "I know," he said. He visited Patrick and Finn 3 weeks later. They lived in a semi-detached house in Gloucester, east of the city. A tidy place with a vegetable garden in the side yard that was clearly Patrick's doing, and a bicycle with a blue frame leaning against the front porch that was clearly Finn's. Patrick answered the door with flour on his hands and the slightly mortified expression of a man who had been caught baking bread on a Saturday afternoon. "Mr. Carmichael, I didn't know you were coming today." "I should have called," Reed said. "I'm sorry." "Come in." The kitchen smelled like warm bread and coffee. Finn was at the table doing homework with a pencil tucked behind one ear. He looked up when Reed came in, and his face did the thing that children's faces do when they're deciding between excited and dignified. He settled on dignified. He was 11 years old, and he appeared to take that seriously. Reed sat across from him. Patrick poured coffee without asking and took the end of the table. "I have something I'd like to offer," Reed said, looking at Finn and then at Patrick. "Your father first, and then you." Patrick folded his hands on the table and waited. "Carmichael Properties manages 14 commercial buildings in the Ottawa area," Reed said. "All of them require regular electrical maintenance and inspection. I'd like to offer a service contract covering all 14 properties. A 5-year agreement at a rate that reflects the actual value of the work, not the number a procurement department arrives at after cutting everything it can." He looked at Patrick directly. "I pulled the Rideau Club's maintenance records before I came today. You've worked there for 9 years. Your work orders have no callbacks. That's not as common as it should be." Patrick was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Carmichael, that's a significant contract." "Yes, I know what it's worth. That's why I'm offering it." "Not because of Finn." "Both," Reed said. "The quality of the work is why I want you specifically. The fact that you raised a son who pays attention and isn't afraid to say something when he sees something, that tells me what kind of person I'd be working with." He paused. "In my experience, those 2 things tend to travel together." Patrick looked at his son for a long moment. Finn looked back at his father steadily. "All right," Patrick said. "Yes, thank you." Reed turned to Finn. "For you, I'd like to establish an education fund in your name. It would cover school through whatever level you want to take it. Trade certification, university, graduate work, anything. No conditions beyond staying enrolled. Finn looked at him carefully. Why? Reed had expected the question. He had been thinking about how to answer it for most of the drive over. Because you told me not to drink the water, he said. And because you were specific. You didn't just tell me something seemed off. You told me what you saw, in the order you saw it. You came to find me even though you didn't know me, and you didn't know whether I'd believe you, and you said please because you'd been raised to be both honest and decent. He let that sit for a moment. Most adults in that situation convince themselves it isn't their business. You didn't do that. Finn thought about it the way he thought about things. Not quickly, not with performance, just genuinely. My dad says it's always your business when you can see something and the other person can't. Patrick made a small sound that was not quite a laugh. He was looking at the table. Your dad is right, Reed said. Outside, the Gloucester Street was quiet in the particular way of Ottawa's East End on a Saturday afternoon in October. A leaf blower running somewhere down the block, two kids on bikes at the corner, the smell of someone's fireplace carrying faintly on the air. Reed stood for a moment on the front step before walking to his car. He thought about the signing. Sophie's hand against the camera. Two fingers pressed against glass 3,000 kilometers apart, which was the closest thing he had managed to an embrace in months. He thought about Donovan sitting somewhere in the city right now, working through a legal strategy that no longer had any shape worth defending. He thought about all the years he had told himself that unhappy was all Donovan was, that the court losses had settled something. He thought about what it had cost him to believe that and how long it had cost him. And then he thought about an 11-year-old boy in a gray vest, 2 sizes too large, standing at the end of a corridor with a yellow flashlight, and the specific, steady certainty of someone who had seen a thing happen, and decided, without a great deal of internal debate, that seeing it meant he had to say it. There was something in that decision, the smallness of it, the plainness of it, that Reed had been trying to put words to ever since the afternoon it had changed everything. He had not managed it yet. But driving back along the Queensway toward the city, watching the October light go orange across the Ottawa River, he thought he was getting closer. It was not courage, exactly. Courage implied that the risk had been calculated and accepted. Finn had not been calculating anything. He had simply been paying attention, the way his father had raised him to, and then he had told the truth about what he saw to the person who needed to hear it. No more than that. Exactly that much. The most useful thing a person could do, in almost any situation, was to be present enough to notice and honest enough to speak, not because someone was certain to listen, not because the outcome was guaranteed, but because the truth had a way of being exactly sufficient when the moment required it, and the moment was always now, and the person who could see it was always the one who had been paying attention. Reed Carmichael drove home through the fading light. Behind him, in a kitchen that smelled of bread and coffee, a boy with a yellow flashlight went back to his homework.